Well, how to be a disciplined listener. Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, how to be a disciplined listener. Today on the program is Mike Reddington, and he's going to talk about being a disciplined listener. And he's my guest today to talk about his book, The Disciplined Listening Method, How a Certified Forensic Interviewer Unlocks Hidden Value in Every Conversation. Mike, welcome to Prudent Money.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You know, right off the bat, I think the title really says it all. You know, the disciplined listening method, not the disciplined talking method. And it seems that we, come down to this problem that we're doing too much talking and really not enough listening.
You hit the nail right on the head. Whether it's due to excitement or fear or any number of other emotions, you are correct. We tend to interject more than we do patiently wait to learn from someone else.
Now, you are a certified forensic interviewer. Talk a little bit about what that is, and what was it that happened that motivated you to write the book?
I appreciate you asking. So a certified forensic interviewer is a professional designation, just like a certified public accountant, that you have to meet the requirements and pass the test and maintain the designation and so forth. For the motivation to write the book, my former teammates and I were in a position where we were often, or nearly always, tasked with having conversations with people. Our goal was to build a relationship necessary to obtain the truth. Their goal was to say nothing. And so we learned lots of techniques to help people save face and build rapport and establish valuable relationships and listen to what other people said and how they say it to identify how they needed to be spoken with. And all too often, those lessons aren't really applied or integrated into our business and personal lives. So the motivation to write the book was born, and it's what led us to where we are today.
Well, and this is a big reason why that I wanted you to come on the program. Great book, by the way. And that we are always communicating when it really comes down to it. Some of them are, highly stressful communications. Some is negotiating with your 2-year-old. We're always communicating, and I don't think that we take that. Learning the techniques that we could be learning we're just missing out on that, which this book does provide.
Oh, you raise great points. And for the record, some of the negotiations I had with my 2-year-old son were some of the most stressful conversations I ever had. But you're right. I think because we do it all day long, we take it for granted. I think all of us, myself included, at certain times, we overvalue our skills. We tend to rationalize our behaviors and or the results we get instead of looking at what else we can achieve together. And if we can just stop and think about what's the long-term outcome that, what you mentioned, my son, if I'm trying to raise a happy, healthy, well-adjusted, positive, contributing member to society, then how I handle this little negotiation with my young son is going to be different than if I'm just trying to make a point like Dad right now. So maintaining those perspectives is very important.
Well, there are 7 core behaviors to the disciplined listening method. I want to kind of jump in and talk about some of this. First is the active listening. Talk a little bit about what that looks like.
Well, really, when we compare disciplined listening to active listening is in many ways the foundation of what we're talking about for many reasons. Haven't been taught since the late 50s. But really, with the disciplined listening method, we're going beyond the performative act of making sure people believe we're paying attention. As you said in the intro, really uncovering hidden value, which starts with, as we mentioned, knowing the goals that this conversation can help us achieve, both long-term and short-term, but also really focusing on what is the communication experience our counterparts need to have in order for them to feel comfortable opening up. So it's not what do we feel like we need to say or do. It's what does somebody else need to experience so they will in turn feel comfortable in many ways sharing what they might believe to be secrets with us.
You know, what's interesting, as you've written this book and you've gotten your message out and you've taught and done all the things that you've done, have you had many people come up to you and say, wow, this really has helped my marriage?
I have. I get the kids one more than the marriage, to be honest, especially with teenagers. I get that a lot.
Combat.
But I have in the marriage and the relationships, and also even writing the book helped me with my marriage. I mean, my wife and I have a very open relationship, but I'm by no means the perfect communicator. And I think to get back to something you said earlier, often our most stressful conversations are with the people we love the most. And so applying these principles outside of investigations in business and in our family conversations can often pay the biggest dividends.
I think my favorite, you're talking about paying attention, probably my favorite example that I can come up with of active listening, which is really not active listening, but it looks like it, is you look like you're listening, but you're also thinking about what you're going to say next. So you're not really listening, and that's something that it's easy to be guilty of.
We all are, and myself included. You know, it's not difficult to look somebody in the eye and nod along while thinking about what you want to say next or where else you would rather be or how you feel at the moment. And honestly, that's how our brains were wired to work, which is really where that disciplined word comes into play, is understanding that there is an opportunity to learn. There is a relationship to either build or reinforce, and there are goals out there that we can achieve. I just have to listen hard enough to find the right thread to pull to get there.
So how do you go about sharing the feelings of others and creating a place of empathy?
That's a great question. So there's different approaches that can work for different people at different times. I'm a big believer in sharing illustrative examples. So if I was to say something like, Bob, you look really sad today. Well, if you're not ready to talk about being sad, I just put you on the defensive, whether I realized it or not. So instead, I might say, hey, Bob, it's great to see you. You know, a lot of times our day starts in unexpected ways that might make us a little bit sad and in conversations we didn't anticipate. So before we go any further, I just want to stop and ask, you know, is there anything unexpected that I can help you with today?
That is the way to communicate. Well, you write to avoid open-ended questions. Talk a little bit about what you mean by closed-ended questioning versus open-ended questioning.
Yeah, so closed-ended questions have their place, often to confirm something we already know or to lock somebody into a specific detail. But often we ask them at times where we think we are asking open-ended questions and we don't realize it. So closed-ended questions tend to shut the door on the opportunity to gather intelligence. They allow people to take a position and then feel forced to defend it. So when we talk about asking open questions, and I know this is something that many folks talk about, it's about giving people poetic license. They have the opportunity to share more, which gives us the opportunity to learn more. And if we think about it from continuing the conversation, it puts more roads on the map for us. So instead of forcing myself down one road, I can take many options. And for me, one of my favorite ways to set up an open question is the phrase, please walk me through, because that generally suggests that I'm looking for a chronological order in detail, so it frames their mind, and then it helps me identify when either of those things might not be what I expected.
So while you're listening, you write to always pay attention to nonverbal clues and body language. Give us some examples of body language that says, you know, you're creating trust versus the body language that says, hey, this conversation is not working for me.
I think when we think about the people that we have relationships with, generally we know what they look like when they're comfortable or uncomfortable. So those general comfortable and uncomfortable behaviors are what we're looking for. Within somebody's own norm, do they appear to be maintaining what's reasonable eye contact for them, what's reasonable open posture for them, what's reasonable engagement for them? If they're illustrating, if they're adding value to their spoken words with their gestures, are those gestures happening on time to the spoken words or off time? Does their body language seem to match the words that they're saying? Those are all things that we would look for. When it comes to some of the stereotypical behavior associated with lying, you know, we want to kind of throw those away immediately. There is no behavior that always indicates somebody's lying. Those behaviors could indicate, however, that somebody is feeling uncomfortable. Maybe because the truth is uncomfortable to share, or maybe because they're not giving us the whole story. But again, understanding the words that they're saying when that uncomfortable behavior arises really helps us elevate our situational awareness. Really quick, the one thing I would add is just because somebody crosses their arms doesn't mean that they're defensive. People will cross their arms either for emotional vulnerability or physical discomfort. So it's important for us as listeners to get a good idea when somebody crosses their arms. Does their back hurt? Is the chair uncomfortable? Are they cold? Is somebody standing too close? Or is it that emotional vulnerability piece by looking at their facial expressions? Do they appear to be in deep thought? Do they appear to be upset? Do they appear to be sad? There could be lots of reasons. We don't just want to assume that somebody is closed off or untrustworthy because they crossed their arms.
And I guess if you're having a critical conversation, you need to figure that out pretty quick.
Yes, and thankfully most of the critical conversations we have with people we already know. So we have that history to fall back on. We have that experience. If we're having critical conversations with people we don't know, then we can kind of start with I don't want to say the stereotypes, but what are some of the generally accepted principles? But again, we want to be very careful not to fall prey to myths. Just because somebody breaks eye contact doesn't mean they're lying. The science is clear. Just because somebody crosses their arms doesn't mean they're defensive. The science is clear. So really elevating our contextual awareness and understanding how the environment is impacting the behavior becomes very important.
You know, it's really interesting because I've read quite a few books on communication, and they don't tell you that. They tell you if A happens, B is the reason. When it's not so cut and dry in black and white, it makes it harder to interpret.
It does make it harder to interpret. And I think for everybody listening to the conversation right now, they might stop and think, well, Mike, I was having a conversation with so-and-so, and I saw them break eye contact and cross their arms and scratch their neck, and I thought, you know what, I think they're lying. And it turned out later I found out they were. Well, I believe that. But I found out later they were is an important piece of this because you found other evidence to substantiate the suspicion later on. And it was not just the behavior that you saw, but it was the context of the situation it was happening in. What was the relationship? What was the topic of the conversation? What else was going on around you? So oftentimes we register those things subconsciously. But if we really want to get to the truth of what someone is thinking and feeling at any moment, registering these contextual elements consciously becomes extremely important. And you're right, it's not easy. It takes discipline and practice.
You know, I was just jotting down some notes, and I wrote down, be quiet and observe.
Yes.
We often don't do that, but there's so much going on if you take a step back and you just really observe.
You're correct. And a lot of times that has to be a learned and practiced behavior. And silence can be uncomfortable for all of us. In different relationships, we might feel like there's dynamics or reputations or roles that we're supposed to live up to or play. But just having the discipline to say, I'm going to wait, I'm going to listen, I'm not going to answer. Oftentimes, if we let the conversation come to us, the more we learn, the more informed we are, the better the decisions we make, and the stronger the relationships we create.
You know, I want to add something to this. I had this question later on in the interview, but I think it's a good time to bring it up. You know, some people could look at this and say, wow, that's really manipulative. And I've always thought if someone is going to that degree of trouble to make sure that we're having a smooth conversation and everybody's getting what they want, that's a show of respect. And it takes a lot of hard work to have those kind of conversations.
I agree on all fronts. It absolutely takes a lot of hard work to have these conversations, which might be why people don't do it more often, if we're being honest.
Sure.
But when we come to that term manipulation, and I know this is a sensitive topic for many, my personal belief is that the term manipulation is neutral, that we manipulate each other all day long. I'm not going to get my 7-year-old son out of the house if I don't manipulate him. I might not find out what the server really believes the best food at the restaurant is unless I manipulate the conversation. So we all do it all the time. whether it's ethical or unethical, really comes down to what are our motivations and intentions.
Right.
What techniques are we using, and how aware is the other person that we are doing this? So it's a great point. It's a very valuable point, but I believe I agree with you if I heard what you said correctly, that if we care enough about the combination of the relationship, the outcome, the person, then we are.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Talking to Mike Reddington about a great book, The Disciplined Listening Method, How a Certified Forensic Interviewer Unlocks Hidden Value in Every Conversation. If you want more information on Mike, go to michaelreddington.com and you can get more information. Is that still a good website for you, Mike?
It is. Thank you for asking.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the two people who are having a conversation and they walk away with two totally different interpretations and understandings of that conversation. How do you go about making sure you're both on the same page?
We might need another couple hours for that question. It's a great question. There's several ways to do it. Obviously, the more clear and concise we can be, if we're asking for verification, if we're confirming that somebody heard, often a great way to do it is just to confirm what the next steps are. So based on this conversation, what does it mean for you? What does it mean for me? What are the next actions we are going to take? How does this change where we are? So that way, even if based on their next action, it shows that they didn't hear what I said, not the way I intended it, now I don't have to insult their listening skills. I can just focus on getting them on the right track for the next steps to help them save face.
So talk a little bit about clarification and summarization, because they look to be about the same thing. I know there's nuances and differences between the two, but talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so summarization is essentially, you talk to me for 2.5 minutes and I repeat back to you what I thought were the top 2 or 3 highlights, the main points of what you said. So that would be a summary. You give me a page, I give you back a paragraph. Clarification is generally more when we're asking questions. So a summary, I'm giving you a statement. Clarification, I'm asking questions. So I'm asking for additional detail, maybe nuances, something that wasn't shared or that I missed the first time. I would suggest that if we are asking for clarification, we don't, and even when we're summarizing as well, we could use that tie-in again here. We're typically better off saying what I believe I heard was, instead of saying, did you say, or I heard you say. Those might come across accidentally accusatory or make it obvious that we weren't listening. So if we say, what I heard you say, or I believe I heard you say, now we can avoid that and be more successful drawing out the additional information.
Now, you also talk about giving feedback. Give us an example of what that looks like, because that can be taken very defensive, from a defensive standpoint.
It can. And when we look at both getting and giving feedback, when we're asking for feedback, it's important that we just let people know, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I appreciate you being honest. And that can even be helpful if we give them an example of direct feedback we've gotten previously. Once I spoke with Bob, he told me all of these things. I didn't love it at first, but it was important. Here's what I learned from it. That will then inspire the next person to be more honest with us. When we are getting feedback, none of us like hearing information that violates our self-image or our expectations or contradicts what we believe. But one of the habits that we try to get into when we're receiving feedback is to listen without saying anything. If we want to argue, if we don't know what to say, just say thank you. Nothing more, nothing less. Just say thank you. And then allow the time for the feedback to settle in and work through our filters. It might take 10 minutes, it might take 2 hours before we can find something valuable from it. So listen and just say thank you to give yourself time to really think through what you were told.
This is Bob Brooks. We're talking to Mike Reddington about a great book. It's called The Disciplined Listening Method, How a Certified Forensic Interviewer Unlocks Hidden Value in Every Conversation. If you want more information, www.michaelreddington.com. You talk about missed opportunities, and this one really caught my eye. Missed opportunities in communication. Talk a little bit about what you mean by that.
Often in any conversation, there can be things that we either knew we could have asked for, spoken about, or learned, and for whatever reason didn't. But there's also plenty of times where we had opportunities to get more that we didn't even realize that were there. So when we are clear on the outcomes we're trying to achieve, when we're clear on the value of the relationship, now we can be more strategic in how we approach the goals we know we want to achieve, the information we know we want to obtain. And depending on the importance of the conversation and the prep time, even writing those things down in advance can help. I can admit that there were times I walked out of an investigative interview thinking I got everything, and 25 minutes later on the car ride home thought, my goodness, I forgot to ask that one question.
Sure.
So, understanding when stress levels rise, we might forget. But again, taking this all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, if I'm just performatively listening, you might say something unexpected that just flies right past me because I wasn't actually engaged with you. But throughout the duration of our conversation, if I can stay focused on what I believe you and I might be able to create together in the future, now you might make an offhand comment that sheds light on the emotion that you're feeling right now, or a fear that you have, or something else that you'd like to do that allows me to reframe the conversation and get us there. So being prepared, focusing on the outcome, not getting tracked or lost in our emotions can all be helpful.
You emphasize in the book the power of observations in negotiations. How can readers apply that power of observation in negotiations? Give us an example.
Yeah, we can tie that right back into the question you had about nonverbal communication.
Yes.
And really the timeliness. So if I am talking about, if I'm presenting an alternative or a series of alternatives, I want to be so familiar with what I am presenting that I'm not focusing on what I'm saying, I'm focusing on what I'm seeing. So that way I can see somebody's reaction to it in real time. And they're just going off their nonverbal behavior, I can't say with concrete certainty what that means, but it can get me in the ballpark. I can have a really good idea, and I can unpack that later in the conversation. So to unpack the power of observation, I really want to be able to associate any change in behavior I see or hear with the trigger that most likely caused it, and be able to evaluate that relationship in the context of the situation to truly unlock what somebody is most likely thinking or feeling. And if I'm too focused on what I'm saying, or if I'm too focused on the emotion I'm feeling, I won't be able to pick up on that.
Mike's book, once again, it's a great book, The Disciplined Listening Method, How a Certified Forensic Interviewer Unlocks Hidden Value in Every Conversation. Mike, it was a pleasure to talk to you today. Congratulations on a great book, and always welcome back.
The pleasure was all mine, Bob. Thank you very much.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I think about communication and how difficult communication can be sometimes, but also how rewarding it can be and how important it can be. And that's why I wanted to bring Mike on, because he's got a lot of great information. He being a forensic interviewer, I would love to have had to hear some stories about that. I'm sure he lives a pretty interesting life with what he does for a living. But this book is packed full of great tips to communicate. And like we were talking about, you're communicating with your kids, having very important communications, and it makes sure you got to get those right, especially with your spouse as well in the workplace. Once again, The Disciplined Listening Method, michaelreddington.com. Hey, this is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.